Hey, Dr. Mike here. Does it matter if your fish is wild caught? Stay tuned to learn more with our guest, Max Francia.
You're listening to Live Foreverish, a show dedicated to helping you live just a little longer. Here's your hosts, Dr. Mike and Dr. Crystal Gossard.
All right, welcome to Live Foreverish. Dr. Crystal, This is a big topic.
It sure is, and controversial.
It is. Wild caught, farm raised. And then we have a guest who's going to talk about another way, kind of a way, a new way, maybe, right? Something like that. Very interesting podcast today. So if you're listening, this is a good one. Let's bring on Max. Max Francia has an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. He is Atlantic Sapphire's marketing director. He has extensive experience in consumer packaged foods, having worked globally at Procter & Gamble and Spectrum Brands. And recently, Max is applying his passion and knowledge of consumer insights, brand management, and strategy to the food sector, where he spearheads Bluehouse Salmon's brand development. Max, welcome to Live Foreverish.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, yeah, it's kind of controversial a little bit here. So let's get it from you, Max. Give us kind of how you define wild caught versus farm raised. Let's just start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it's wild caught, basically it's caught in its natural habitat. It could be a lake, the ocean, a river, depending on the species that we're talking about. It could be commercially caught, and it could be also more on a kind of a craftsmanship type of operation. But in any case, it's when the fish is mature enough and they're caught in their environment. If you're talking about farm raised, that's completely different, right? It's a very controlled operation. There are many different ways of doing that. It could be it could be on land, like we're going to be discussing in a few minutes. It could be also farm raised in the ocean as well. So it is really an interesting topic, and I believe there's an opportunity to educate more consumers in the marketplace about the differences and the benefits of each method.
So you just brought up something I never thought about before. Every time visually I've considered farm raised, I've considered them almost like on the banks. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like right there on the coast or
Yeah.
on a dock, and then you have these nets, and then like you're kind of keeping the fish right there. I've never visualized a farm actually further out into
I
the
see
ocean.
what you're saying.
Almost,
Yeah, yeah.
almost like, you go out, no land to be seen. Are there farms out there as well? Is that what I'm hearing, that you can farm? I know it's a bizarre question, but for me, that makes
now
a
that
difference.
now I'm thinking about that.
right?
I'm not sure. Max, where's the
Yeah.
where's the farm?
So yeah, I mean, again, there are different methodologies, right? Land raised actually means that you're doing that on land in close containment. It's away from the ocean. Our operation is actually 15 miles away from the coastal area of Miami, right? So we're about an hour south of Miami. So imagine that, an hour south and about 15, 16 miles inland, almost in the Everglades, completed removed from any type of
So that's
ocean.
so that's land.
That's
right,
land.
right. Okay.
Yeah. And then farm is on the banks and maybe out further in the ocean, or where's the farm part?
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. Sorry about that. I thought you were asking me about the land raise. No, absolutely.
No. Like we're confused. We don't know where the farm is. Where are the fish in the farm?
Oh, okay. So let me step back. Yes. So the conventional way of raising salmon is in the ocean. So about 80% of all the salmon consumption in the world, and potentially even more lately because of restrictions on wild caught, is farmed in the ocean. The two biggest countries are Norway and Chile, and that happens in the coastal areas, right? Like you were saying, like the banks, the fjords, if you would, in
Okay.
Norway, for example, because it's a very cold species, right? So we need water that is about 11 Celsius, about 43 Fahrenheit, more and less. So it is really cold. They're subject to all kind of currents, and it's happening in a net pen. So, imagine exactly that, a net that is submerged, and you have the school of fish in there, could be anywhere from 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 fish in those net pens. And those are in the coastal areas, right? So
Okay.
the entire operation happens, within a maybe half a mile at the most from
Okay.
from shore.
And tell
So
me
that
about, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to mention something else that happens also in the ocean, that it's kind of a new development. There's a lot of technology that will need to be proven and developed over the next few years. But that's more kind of offshore farming. So
Mm,
imagine
Okay, that's where you would.
like engines or oil, actually, not like the oil industry, right? Again, in Norway, or in other countries, in the northern sea, for example, that happens miles into the ocean. It is very different, and that could be another alternative. That is something that it's being investigated at the moment. It's being tested. It's very complex technologically speaking as well, because these are similar to the platforms, like I was saying, where you extract oil. So it is subject to more winds, the force of the winds, the force of the current, obviously storms. So it is
mhm.
more difficult. That's why
Okay.
today the operation really happens in the coastal areas, if you're talking in the ocean. And then we have
Okay.
the land
Okay.
race, which is what I was
Right.
Right,
referring
right.
to.
Before we go to the land range, though, like let's talk about the controversy, because there are people who are like the purists. Yeah, I hear them say this all the time. I have friends who say, "I would never buy farm," and then others are like, "Well, no, actually, it turns out farm's not so bad." What's the controversy? Why do we? What's wrong with farm? Is it better than wild? I mean, which help us out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I gotta say that's a question that I always get asked whenever I'm in like birthday party with my sons or anything like that. I get so many people that are interested, and once I mention what I do, they really want to know. Like you said, what is the difference between wild caught? What is better? What is more nutritious, for example, or healthier in general? And the reality is that there's opportunity really to have both methods of production. And the reason why I say that, and then I'll get a little bit into the specifics of each one, but the reason why I start there is because the consumption of salmon, seafood in general, but especially for salmon, is just going to keep increasing over the next few
Mm-hmm.
years, 5, 10, 15 years. Public policy is asking for more consumption of seafood.
Mhm.
We consume about um, less than a third of what Scandinavian countries consume on a weekly basis of seafood, and especially salmon. So, it is a lot healthier because of the obviously the omega 3s, the healthy fats. So, we do need to increase our consumption
Mm-hmm.
starting at younger
Right.
ages, right? So, people who are or kids and in school should be eating a lot more seafood. So, what that means is that our demand for seafood is going to increase. And the US is the number one market as a country for salmon. That also explains why our operation is here local in the States versus other countries. So we don't have to import the food and the fish, and we don't need to fly it, which has a huge carbon footprint as well. So that's on the environmental side. It has its benefits as well. But the proximity to the market, it is an essential part of the
Mm-hmm.
strategy.
Okay.
Now, I believe that, like I said, the wild caught is a bit limited, right? Because you need to protect the species in its natural habitat. You cannot keep overfishing the different stocks, and whether it's in the western side of the country, in Canada, which is where most of the fish
Right.
are coming from.
And that's already a big problem, right? Overfishing. I mean, we're already doing that, right? It's not that it's
Exactly.
coming. We are, right? Okay.
We are, and the state of Alaska, for example, is doing a great job trying to protect the wild stocks and trying to control more or less all the commercial operations, being that the biggest source of wild caught that we have in the country. The other part would be coming from Canada, but the reality, like I said, is that is completely limited. We do need to increase our production of farm seafood, and why, and then the question that I pose is why import it, right? It's a trade deficit for the country, and it has the environmental impact. Why not do it locally? And when you do it locally, then you have a number of options, right? If you talk about farm, though, it's still happening in different locations. It's still healthy, I would say. If you compare it to other proteins, for example, just to take that direction for a little bit, the conversation that direction, you compare it to beef or chicken, for example. With beef, especially, just the water consumption of the production of
Shoot,
beef with the
yeah.
cattle needs, it's just tremendous. That's number one. Number two, the omega-3, the healthy fats are missing, right, in beef, which is what we have in salmon. So we do need that farm salmon that is controlled, that is efficiently done, that keeps the welfare of the fish in mind, right? And there are many operations like those. So, and like I said before, you could find them in Chile, you could find them in Norway, in the UK, in New Zealand. There are a few countries in the world where you could see that, in Canada as well. So we have room for that. And then enter the third production method, which is land raise. And when we get there, you're
Before
going
you
to
go,
see
Max, I'm
high
sorry.
speed.
Before you go there, going back to the farmer, what are the so you're at your son's birthday party and you have people coming up and and you start talking about the need maybe for farm salmon. What's their main objection? Like, what is the
Yeah.
main objection to farm? Because I hear all kinds of stuff that I don't know if any of it's true or confirmed.
Absolutely. The main objection is health related. So people believe that farm salmon is actually full of uh, contaminants. It's full of PCBs, mercury, antibiotics, all kind of medicines as well. And that's just not true. I think there's a myth because of some farming operations that were not actually salmon. There were other species that really affected the reputation of the seafood uh, farm production, and that has cascaded onto the
Yeah.
salmon production as well. But the
So
reality is that it's very controlled. That's not the case.
okay, so that I think that is, and I've seen some of those images and uh, news headlines about what's happening with some of the other species. So would you say, outside of salmon, if that's not happening with salmon, just um, other fish in general, it may be better to consume wild versus farmed?
It might be. I don't know enough about shrimp or cod or trout, for example, which are other species that are
Tilapia
also
was a big one, wasn't
tilapia, of course. I mean, tilapia was
it?
probably the one that triggered a lot of
Yeah,
the
I think I remember that. I think it's a lot of bad headlines with tilapia. Yeah.
very, very bad. And the reality is that those things that were in the news were true, right? I mean, all those farms, like the way they were set up, it was not properly done, and it affected people's perception. And unfortunately, that has also created repercussions for salmon and other species like trout or shrimp. I couldn't comment too much about those others, and to tell you, definitely wild is better. I know there are also land-raised shrimp operations, for example, in Florida, that are being proposed as another alternative that is healthier. So I think there's a very big movement towards that. There's actually part of the seafood industry that believes that land-raised is the future of seafood production versus wild, right? Because of the reasons that I say, because it's so limited in the wild, the wild caught production has to be restricted, and we just need to keep increasing our consumption
Right.
of seafood.
Yeah, so
Um,
let's talk about land
Yeah,
raised.
you been Max has been waiting for this. He's been dying to talk about
All right,
land
so I
race.
know you kind of shared a few details earlier, but can you just go back over land raised? What is land raised? And
How is it
what?
different? How
Yeah,
is it
how is it
different
different than
than
traditional farm
yeah,
raised? How is it? And obviously, we can kind
yeah,
of tell it's different from
right,
wild if
right.
it's on the land.
And is it
So,
healthier? All that kind of like give us
mhm.
the gist, just starting with what it is. Like what do what is raised?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So land raise is basically a method of production where you have your fish in close containment. In our case, we're talking about circular tanks, for example, right? Which grow in size, and the capacity, the volume of water that each contains also grows with the size of the fish as they are maturing. Um, the the technology specifically is called RAS, recirculating aquaculture system, and the reason is because they're water sources that could come from different origins. It could, in our case, it's coming from the ground that it's below the surface in the Floridian and Biscayne Bay aquifers, for example, whether it's fresh water or salt water. In other cases, it comes from rivers. In other cases, it could come from oceans, and it's pumped into those recirculating systems where it's constantly used, it's filtered, right? And then after about 30 days or so, it's either sent to the ocean after it's been filtered and treated in the case of other operations, or in the case of Bluehouse Salmon, it's actually filtered and re-injected back into the ground. We are in Miami-Dade, so the county has injection wells for treated water, wastewater, and they have about 216 of those. We have one, which is enough really to support our operation, and that tells you a little bit about the biggest difference, right? Which is the water treatment and the water
Mm-hmm.
management. If you think about land raised, there are two big things that are very different. Number one is the water management, and number two is the energy consumption, right? So I'll speak briefly about the energy consumption because everything has to be controlled, like I said, and it's a cold water species. So you need to have the temperature in the tanks at the right temperature,
Right.
very low. So it is ideal for the welfare of the fish, for their development and their well-being over the 20 to 22 months that they stay in the tanks as they're growing and maturing. So that's for the energy consumption. Then the water, um, it's very difficult to get permits for water treatment in the States. So if you go to areas where the water is colder, like maybe Maine, the state of Maine, for example, it is incredibly difficult because once you've treated the water and you discharge it into a river or the ocean, then you're always running the risk of creating an algae bloom or
Mm-hmm.
affecting the
Right.
ecosystem, for
Makes
example.
sense. Yeah.
That is yeah, absolutely. That is one of the biggest threats that you could face. Now, what we do differently again is we inject that into something called the boulder zone, and that boulder zone basically treats the water over time, hundreds to thousands of years, and it comes out as salt water back into the Atlantic Ocean.
Huh.
So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit the operation of a recirculating aquaculture system, which is what you would use in a land raised farm.
And so the end result, right, is the salmon the same nutritional value of wild caught? Is it, or do you find them to be healthier? Do they have more omega-3 content? So it's not. We understand that we need to be doing this because we're running out of salmon,
Right.
right? So we got to do something. And is your way, not only is it better for the environment, does it produce a better fish?
hmm I think it depends on the type of operation that you have for the farm salmon. Uh, there are many comparable metrics. I would say, like the protein levels, for example, the fat levels. You could look at those. The protein is very similar. Like if you're looking at a 3 ounce portion of salmon, if it's wild caught or if it's farmed in general, uh, it is extremely similar. According to the USDA, it's about, if I'm correct, about 17.2 grams, for example, for that size of a portion in farmed, and 17.9 if it's wild caught. So it's basically identical.
Wait,
Um,
that's the same. That's the same for you. Your land raised too, right? You're saying when you're saying farm, there are you including your land raised in that conversation? Okay.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's still very healthy whether you choose farm or wild when it comes to the protein levels, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference in the appearance. I think that, and that's where a lot of questions come in as well, because then there's the question of color and fat, right?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. You're gonna have to edit that. I heard
You're
something.
okay. You're okay. No. No worries.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no. So the biggest difference then would be, for example, the color, right? You have a vibrant, almost red type of color when it's wild caught salmon, and it tends to be more orange, a little bit on the paler side when it's farmed. Even bluehouse salmon as well. But the thing is, it has to do with the diet, right? If it's wild, it's eating potentially krill, it's eating other crustaceous forms in their diet, and that's generating the beta carotenes that need to be in their diet normally.
Mm-hmm.
If it's farmed, then you're using feed that is developed especially for this type of fish, and then you're using astaxanthin. Astaxanthin could be done in a natural way, categories that you're going to be using. So the reality is that you still get the same nutritional value. The appearance is a bit different, and of course, then that is the preference of each one of the consumers. But that I would say that's an area where I get a lot of questions as well. Um, the third area, which is actually, I would say, is favorable, really more to farmed salmon in land raised methodology, is the levels of mercury.
Mm.
Um, and
Yes,
the
that's a
reason
big thing.
that's another big question that we always get asked in social media, in our blogs, because consumers are learning more and they're researching and they really want to eat something that is healthier for them. So mercury is number one, and microplastics is number two. And I think both tend to be favorable to land-raised salmon, especially. Mercury, because the feed is engineered with more novel ingredients. For example, we're using algae-based forms of oil versus caught in the sea, which means that there's no mercury moving along the food chain, right? Because
Right.
it was done with
Yeah.
algae oil, which is the very origin of everything that is going to come after that, right? Like the krill's going to eat that, and sardines, then the salmon, for example, just collapsing a little bit the the food chain. But that's the reason why mercury levels are so low in land raised. We actually ran a few tests. We always doing this, to stay on top, obviously, of our nutritional values and any type of contaminations. And first, there are no, well, going back to mercury, I'm sorry, it's 180 times below the FDA allowance for mercury. And that is a lot less than what you would find in wild, right? Because of what I just explained. So that is a benefit of eating land raised salmon. If it's farmed conventionally, then it is eating also feed that is dropped into the net pens. So you still have a benefit, but they're still in the wild. So there could be a little bit of
A little bit more.
Right.
mercury in their
Right.
environment. Then going back to microplastics, dioxins, right? Like PCBs, all of that. That's unfortunately in the ocean, right? We all heard about what's happening in the Pacific Ocean and all, just impact on the environment. And that's not happening when you're talking about close containment land-raised salmon, because our water source, specifically in our case, like I was saying, is coming from two artisan aquifers, the Biscayne Bay aquifer and the Floridan aquifer for the salt water. So that hasn't seen any man-made pollution at all. It's just water that's been sitting there for thousands of years, about
Yeah.
3,000 feet underground. So that's a source of our water. Doesn't have mercury, doesn't have microplastics, doesn't have any type of dioxins. That means that we don't use antibiotics in the production of our salmon ever. They don't need it. They never get sick.
Wow.
It could be sea lice, it could be other viruses in the ocean, right? That they get
Mm-hmm.
exposed to that in conventional farming. When it's land raised, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious about the texture, because when the fish, when they're out in the ocean, they're swimming, the the muscle, especially like the larger, the
Oh, I see where
stronger
you're going with this.
fish,
Yeah. Okay.
that the muscle in the fish texture is just a
They're
little more
working.
tough.
They're
It's more
swimming. They got
meaty.
predators to avoid. They got stuff to do.
yes.
Right. So do you see any differences?
Yes, I do. So one is the color, like I was saying before, but then talking specifically about the kind of the structure of the meat per se, the wild salmon is leaner, and because the farm tends to have a higher fat content. Um, like you were saying, Mike, you were saying that they tend to, or they need to avoid predators, right? It
Hmm.
is true. They're exercising constantly. They're going against the current. They're evading predators. So they're leaner in nature. You typically see in farm salmon more of a kind of the fat, more marbling, the white
Mm,
lines in the structure. You don't see that in wild. Wild is
that's
leaner.
very true. And I can remember when I first learned this, just generally when people used to say, well, which form has the most omega-3 fats? And when I used to teach that, surprisingly, it's farm
Yeah,
fish
farm fish.
will have higher levels of omega-3s because it is a fattier fish. So now it all comes together because they're not
They're not.
exercising.
Listen, they got a nice life. They don't got to worry about being eaten. It's pretty
No, no,
well
no.
eventually by us.
Not in the tank though.
Not in the
They're safe
tank.
in the tank.
So the land, process, the lamb raised, is that available in stores right now? I don't think I've seen packaging for land raised or what, or is it just say farm raised on the packaging? Like what's?
Good question.
Mhm. It is available. Depending on which part of the country, you get different companies that sell it retail. So supermarkets like Publix here in the state of Florida, and well, all the way actually to South Carolina, and I believe maybe they're in Virginia. They do have land raised salmon. They have Bluehouse Salmon, so they're a great partner, and they want to provide their customers with different options. So they have their conventional farming offering, the conventional salmon. They have the blue house salmon, which is land raised. And but the thing is that because of the nature of the industry, there's not a lot of branding, which is what we're trying to change. We're trying to
Mm.
use the brand to really educate consumers and let them know about the benefits and the different attributes of, in our case, our brand being fresh from Florida, uh, no use of antibiotics ever, being land raised. So far, I mean, it's a process, and there are many different
Yeah.
marketing strategies that we're following to try to do that and engage the community, engage influencers and people who could really get the word out and help us really sharing our message. But so far, you wouldn't see packaging because it's fresh, right? So we're only selling in the fresh counter, and you don't see branding there. You basically see just kind of the origin of the salmon,
It's like
whether
it's a little piece of paper that says
Oh.
where it's from or
So, and
something.
it
Yeah.
will it say land raised or will it say farmed?
it says farm because
Okay.
of the regulations. Yes, that which is part of the things that we want to change. Some retailers allow us to have what we call small sign toppers. So we next to that piece of paper, right, of plastic that has the price per pound. It has maybe the origin, whether the product is from Norway, it's from the USA, or it's from Chile, or any other location. They allow us to put this that has our brand, has a QR code, so people can scan it and learn more about the production
Okay.
method. And it has a few of the attributes, right? It says no antibiotics ever. It says blue house raised, which is the methodology that we want to promote, really.
So Max, this is fantastic information. I want to try it.
I
Gee.
tried it.
Oh, you did?
So I met Max, all of you who are listening. I was at a conference, the American Dietetic Association
Oh,
Food and
okay.
Nutrition Conference, and I was there with a seafood education organization. They had a booth, and so they were kind of explaining, this concept. I
Mhm.
didn't really, I know so much more now, but I did try it.
So they had samples for you.
They had samples.
What did
That's
you?
what's
Well,
great
what,
at the
tell,
Food and Nutrition Conference. There's always samples.
tell us what you thought. What
Uh,
was it?
It was good. It was good. It was more in the style. It wasn't the fresh. I guess it was more like how you would find tuna prepared.
Oh, so it wasn't. They didn't like grill it or something.
Right. It wasn't.
Okay,
It
yeah.
wasn't grilled, but
Okay, but still
I
good,
can't
though.
wait.
Okay, yeah. So Max, if our listeners want to learn more about Bluehouse Salmon and the land raised process, where can they? Is there a website we can send them to?
Yes, of course. You should visit bluehousesalmon.com. That's a website. You're going to have a wealth of information there about the process, about the brand, the comparisons, health attributes, a blog where we have guest writers as well, whether depending, the topic, whether it's heart, health, or sustainability practices, protection of wild species, like all the different benefits around the process, the Blue House and land raised process. Also, if you want to have access to recipes and daily information, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and the handle is at Bluehouse Salmon, one word.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today, Max. Fascinating information and good luck with what you do. And it sounds pretty good.
I know.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and always happy to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing and why the market needs to know more about this as we all get healthier.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, don't forget, you go to liveforeverish.com where there are tons and tons of other episodes you can download, like, share, and comment, and of course, subscribe so you never miss a show. That's liveforeverish.com. But also our sponsor, Life Extension. Because you guys are so awesome, our audience, Dr. Crystal. If you go to lifeextension.com, purchase whatever you want at checkout, use the code PODCAST. How was I going to say it? Podcast. And you get 10% off, $50 or more, and free shipping and handling at lifeextension.com. I'm Dr. Mike. That's
Dr. Crystal.
Thanks for listening.